10 years ago, the province introduced the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. The goal? To make Ontario fully accessible by 2025. So how are we doing? Well, not so good. This week, the province released some new measures to try and get us there. The action plan wants to ensure businesses are more accessible for customers and employees. Ontario plans to spend $9 million over the next 2 years. That money would go towards things like job training for disabled post-secondary students and helping businesses that want to be more accessible. The program is also launching a loan program for businesses that hire and retain disabled staff. A lot of goals have been set, once again, but at this point, those are still just words on a page. We decided to spend a day with a woman this law is supposed to be helping. Christina Stevens has her story.
You can't get up the stairs.
I know.
And there's a stair there.
And there's a step there.
You might say this Jaguar dealership is posing a bit of a problem for Leila Gusisala. It seems a demo vehicle is parked on the ramp and she can't get past.
The answer is no, because I would go right off that end.
We did track down a salesperson.
How would I get in?
We haven't. Let me check for you.
But that wasn't the only barrier.
Your cars are parked in wheelchair parking spaces.
Gusisala says she encounters these kinds of obstacles virtually every time she goes out. Today was no exception, like the stair at a nearby frame shop.
There's no way, unless chairs can levitate. There's no way.
She says making sure places are accessible has to become a higher priority for the government and private citizens, adding even when things like this are pointed out to businesses, it doesn't necessarily make a difference.
I wouldn't place bets that if I came back in a couple of months, it would be changed.
She says there seems to be little will for change and there's been too much reliance on education only.
But it needs to be enforced, because if you don't enforce it, what's going to happen?
But there are exceptions.
Welcome to Gets Leila in the Door.
Those who go the extra mile, like her hairdresser.
And make your way to the right.
The owner of Salon Absolute has adapted as best he can while he awaits delivery of a specially ordered ramp. He says he didn't hesitate for a moment and wants other businesses to address accessibility.
Because everybody's a human being. Just because you're in a wheelchair doesn't mean that you should be accessible between you and I. We're the same people.
Yet Gusisala is constantly surprised by people who don't think like that.
It doesn't make me sad so much as it makes me angry and frustrated.
Still, she's not giving up, even if it means pushing for change one business at a time. Christina Stevens, Global News.
Now, this new action plan that was announced by the Liberals this week calls for a new external agency to beef up enforcement and compliance, making sure that businesses are accessible to people with disabilities. But just a couple of months ago, the minister responsible told me that enforcement wasn't the answer.
The way to do it is to work with the business community rather than stick it down their throats with tough enforcement.
But now with this new action plan comes the announcement of a tripling of the number of audits to see if businesses are complying. Another way to say enforcement, which the minister explains this way.
What we're doing is we're looking at ways to do enforcement smarter.
But you're increasing enforcement. Previously you said, well, no, we just get people on board in the industry.
As I said, we're looking for ways to do enforcement smarter.
So more enforcement, but smarter. Now, the government says this week's announcement was meant to kickstart a process that it admits has lost momentum in recent years. Ten years ago, Ontario passed the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, and it set out very specific goals to be achieved within 20 years to make this province fully accessible to everyone. So 10 years in, how are we doing? To talk about that, I'm joined by the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act Alliance Chair, David Lepofsky. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thanks for inviting me.
Where are we? How is the government done halfway through?
10 years into this legislation being implemented, there's been some progress, but we're not on schedule for full accessibility for 2025, and frankly, even worse. This legislation has, even after 10 years of the government saying they're working away at it, has not made a significant difference in the lives of over 1.8 million Ontarians who have a disability. That's not just me talking, that's the view of an independent review that the government picked and appointed to take our temperature and see how we're doing.
This week, the Minister of Economic Development announced some new changes and some new policies, essentially saying, well, we have sort of stalled on the momentum and want to get it going again. What's your reaction to those changes?
He's announced a number of measures that are helpful, but they're not enough to get us on schedule, and they're certainly not enough to ensure that we get to full accessibility by 2025.
What's your take on enforcement? Earlier in the show, we had played a clip of Mr. Dogood sort of saying, well, you know, ramming this down private industry's throat is not the way to do it. And now, with the new changes, they've done a bit of an about-face and said, well, we're going to triple the number of audits, essentially checks on businesses that we do.
The day this law was passed 10 years ago, the minister who wrote the law said that effective enforcement is absolutely essential to make sure a law is complied with. You've got to educate people on what they got to do, but if they don't comply, you've got to enforce it. Imagine drunk driving laws or speed limits or any of those kind of laws if people knew there was no effective enforcement. Well, the government promised effective enforcement, but up until recently, they were doing quite the opposite. They were doing a paltry job of it, which we flushed out through Freedom of Information applications. Now, to the credit of Minister Brad Dogood, he has done an about-face. He's gone from poo-pooing enforcement to saying that they're going to step it up. If he does what he says he will do, that will be a helpful step forward. It was only the result of grassroots efforts of people with disabilities like those in the coalition that I serve that drove this about-face by the government and drove them back to getting closer to keeping the promise they've made to us years ago.
We are shortly going to be hosting the Parapan Games in the city of Toronto and throughout the GTHA. And many promises were made about the increase in infrastructure for accessibility. Is that coming true?
Well, this is now on the road to being a huge and tragic missed opportunity. Yes, the sporting facilities will be state-of-the-art accessible, and that's great. And same for the Athletes' Village, that's what we're told. But when you go outside the bubble of the stadiums and the Athletes' Village, if the 250,000 tourists, including tourists with disabilities, or the 1,600 para-athletes with disabilities want to leave that bubble, want to find something to eat in a restaurant, shop in our stores, or just find a place to go to the bathroom, the government has, as far as we can tell, not done anything substantive to get businesses, to get local tourism and hospitality providers to increase the accessibility of their services and their places. This is a huge missed opportunity. When other cities have hosted these kind of sporting games, they set out in advance to establish a legacy of improved accessibility of tourism and hospitality services. To her credit, the Premier directed the minister responsible for these games last fall, after our pressure, to get to work on this, but they haven't done it. And so with the games fast approaching, we are going to be embarrassed with the world watching if people with disabilities who come here find that there are not that many great opportunities to go out and enjoy all our city has to offer.
You think it's going to reflect poorly on Toronto, that here we are hosting it, we just simply don't outside, as you say?
I'll put it to you this way. For us folks with disabilities, whenever that torch comes through a community on its way to Toronto, we think of the path of the trail of accessibility, of improved accessibility it could have blazed if the government had listened to us a year and a half ago when we raised this huge gap in their plans. It's not too late. They still could do a last-ditch effort, and we are reaching out to try to get them to do so and to work with them to that end.
So still some time left for that. All right, David Lepofsky is the chair of the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act Alliance. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thanks again.